have Tom Wieczorek here. Tom is the director for the Center for Public Safety Management, based out of Washington, D.C., and has been advising cities all across the world on some trends and data analysis that really helps ensure that dollars are going where dollars need to go. So Tom has a former career as a police officer, a firefighter, a fire chief, and a city manager. So he's just the kind of person that we need talking about all those things. And again, flew out of, you came from, where'd you come from? Chicago? DC.
Going to Chicago.
Yeah, going to Chicago. So we're happy that he's able to stop here in Hutto and provide us with a presentation this evening. So Tom.
Thank you. Sometimes I always wondered, did I work my way down in my career or up? I never was sure some days which way it was. But one of the things that we're called upon and why we were created is to help cities that are looking at what do they do with the next generation of public safety. You know, obviously, tradition has guided a lot of what we do, but are there better ways? And one of the things that I've had the privilege of doing is after I retired as city manager, I was the executive director for the Commission on Fire Accreditation International. And as part of that, we looked at how do we bring data into making decisions in the fire service, which traditionally is governed by tradition and not always data. As we look at emergency services and as the group that I'm with look at emergency services, law enforcement in many ways has made the change into doing making data-driven decisions. The fire service often is lagged behind, and the people have asked me, why is that so? And the biggest challenge that I've seen since getting involved at the federal level and state levels, we spend about $16 billion a year in research development in the police area. $16 billion. That's with the Department of Justice, FBI, you have cabinet positions. The fire service gets approximately $6 million a year, and that has been under attack each year. So the opportunities for research, development, coming up with change is much more limited. A lot of times it's piggybacked onto law enforcement because that's the only way to do it, or it's been privately driven. So there's a huge discrepancy. One of the things is, as we look at public safety and the opportunities, this building, and one of the things I encourage communities to look at, if you're looking at making a change in how you do business, look at a comprehensive AED program. The building that you see on fire there was about 2 blocks from my house. It's a 9-story building. Pretty routine fire. This fires go in DC, except the firefighters had to go up 9 flights of stairs and then come back down 9 flights of stairs. Lieutenant Kevin McRae got to the bottom of the stairs, went into sudden cardiac arrest and died. He was the 100th firefighter killed in Washington, D.C. Ironically, that term applies, the 99th firefighter killed in Washington, D.C. was his cousin who died of the exact same thing. So having a comprehensive AED program in your community is one of the things that we really push. It's something that's affordable, it's something that can be done. Not to point out grants, but there are a number of grants, especially for smaller communities developing. We're working in Rocky Mount, North Carolina on a comprehensive AED program. They've placed 150 of them around the community. Again, making sure that those tools are available when they might be needed. Firefighters or fire departments used to be fire departments that occasionally went on EMS calls. Today, most fire departments are EMS departments that happen to occasionally go on fire calls. We've seen almost a complete change as the fire service has been called upon to be first responders, to be EMS, to sometimes transport. And so there's a huge change and a number of opportunities. This comment that I always liked, and good is the enemy of great. And that is one of the key reasons why we have so little that becomes great. We don't have great schools, principally because we have good schools. We don't have great government, except here in Hutto, excuse me, principally because we have good government. Few people attain great lives, in large part because it is just so easy to settle for a good life. So do we want to be great in our organizations, or do we want to be good? I always looked at it as a city manager and as a chief, and then at the accreditation, that our goal is to be great. That government should always be great in what we do. There's no, a lot of times we get a bad rap, People like to kind of dump on government. Seems to be a new trend. But by and large, it's sometimes because we don't brag sometimes about what we do well, and we don't have a way to demonstrate how we're doing a good job. If you asked me if I was a good fire chief, I'd tell you I was a great fire chief. There's no doubt. If you asked me to prove it, that could have been another whole challenge. And when we went through the accreditation, I found that we had the data, we had the performance, we had the analytics, that I could demonstrate how we performed and that we did a great job, not just a good job. Again, never look back unless you're planning to go that way. In this community, and certainly as I drove around and got a brief tour, you are on the verge of a much greater level of growth than what you've even seen, but you still have a pretty blank canvas, so you have a lot of opportunity to do a lot of different things that many communities wish they could do. My city was 150 years old. I always wished I could have put in the water mains the way they should have been, the storm sewer mains the way they could be, and different things. It would have been a great deal to do. Randy Brugman, fire chief in Anaheim, California, he's the president of the accreditation, always said you cannot improve something that you cannot measure. If we can't measure it, how are we going to know if we improved? How are we going to know if we made a difference? Was it good or bad? Sometimes we can make changes that aren't good, but how do we know what it is? And Randy wrote a book, Exceeding Customer Expectations, that looked at 3 points. One was look at cross-functional teaming. Are there opportunities, especially in city government, that we can work among departments, police, fire, DPW? One of the things that I found is that I look back as city manager, if we were having a code enforcement problem at a house, it was probably going to be a call to EMS at some point. It was probably going to be a call to the fire department. It was probably going to call the police department. It was probably going to have a delinquent water bill. It may have other issues going with it. Most of these places don't exist in a vacuum. And so can we take the opportunity of using all of our city resources and tools to solve problems? And sometimes we lose sight of that. We get to, especially in local government, we like to do our silo approach because I'm not going to talk to the fire department, and I'm not going to go to the city manager, and we're not going to do this. Why aren't we talking? Why aren't we regularly seeing how can we resolve the issue? How can we get to the bottom of it and cost effectively make a change? Again, identifying customer expectations. Do we ask the customer what they want? Do we have a regular opportunity to do that? A lot of times we design systems because we just are experts. But do we ever ask our customer? And the one thing that we have to look at, especially in the police, fire, EMS areas, we as local government normally operate under a monopoly approach. If I call the fire department here, I can't say, well, I'd like the Houston Fire Department to come and answer my call. I'm going to get your fire department. If I call EMS, I'm going to get your EMS department. Are they meeting my expectations? Has it been designed to meet my expectations, or is it designed to meet something else? So have we looked at that of asking the customer, what is it that you expect, and how is it that you want your service delivered? Two pretty easy questions sometimes we don't like to ask. And then careful measuring and mapping. Are we looking at how we're performing? Are reports regularly generated, or do we just issue standard reports that everybody sees? Do we carefully look at what is our performance level? Are we meeting our standards of cover? Are we meeting what we've told the citizens that we can do? Why would we use data? Why would we want to change? Well, basically, the first reason is if you're really looking at complying with NFPA standards, and as a combination department, you'd be guided by NFPA 1720, for instance, where 1710 is all career. But what everybody missed in both of those standards, and I've sat on the 1710 committee since the year after it was created, is that the first order of business is to do a comprehensive risk analysis and then determine what staffing you're going to make. Everybody, it was like a bad mystery novel. Everybody jumped to the last page of the 1710 and 1720 standards and said, aha, you have to have 15 people. Well, you might have had to have 50 people. You might have had to have 2 people. If you don't know your risks and you don't know what's at stake in your community, how do you design a response that's going to meet the needs of the community? If you're designing a response for all high-rise buildings in Hutto, you're probably, you're going to, I just want to put a long U on there. I've been fighting that all day today. You know, if you're designing for high-rise, you don't have a lot of high-rise in the community yet, but you're certainly getting some taller buildings. But are you planning for that? Are you looking at those risks, it's to do the risk assessment and then design the system, not design the system and then say, oh, well, we'll make it fit the risks, because it may be totally wrong for your community. Again, ISO reviews. You're at ISO 2. That's one of the best, and I'll have a slide here in a minute. It's one of the best ratings you can get. And ISO ratings are normally, insurance costs are normally banded. So 1 through 4 department's going to primarily get the same rate as any, if you're a 2 or 4, you're going to have the same rate. So is ISO important? It certainly is one of the comparisons that you can look at, but it's not always the best, because one of the problems that we've seen with ISO over the years is it looks at what you are able to afford and the tools that you're able to get. It doesn't always say, can you use those tools? Can you perform with those tools? A classic example was Charleston, South Carolina, which was an ISO 1 department and had 9 firefighters killed in a sofa sleeper store fire. They had all of the pieces, they just didn't work. And so that was one of the problems of just relying on one set of standards, one set of information. It's really a mosaic of looking at where do you want to be and where do you hope to be. Standard of response coverage. Do you look at what your standard of response coverage is? And just a little bit of history about that. It actually came out of the UK, starting at about 1935. The term standard of response coverage was the United Kingdom saw World War II, the oncoming battles. They saw what happened in Poland. They saw the invasion. And so the concept was they could move their emergency resources out of the way when the bombings occurred so that they could then redeploy and fight the fires and rescue the people. It was revised in 1955. It was revised again in 1985, at which time the UK looked at it and said, you know, we keep adding resources and adding equipment and adding stations and adding resources and adding equipment and adding stations, and the outcome is always the same. When a fire occurs, it's a loss. Doesn't matter what you've got out there, once the fire happens, it's a loss. And so beginning in 1985, and it was kind of unveiled in 2001, they moved to a concept called integrated risk management planning that looked at how do we prevent fires in the first place. And that if we have a fire, it's a failure on our part to have looked at ways to have not had that incident occur. And so they moved almost 180 degrees. They went from a response focus to one of prevention. The result has been a double digits, almost 60% reduction in fire fatalities, fire injuries, responder injuries and fatalities, and property loss. And if you think about it, when a house burns today, what's usually the result after a major fire? It's torn down because we have black mold issues, we have all kinds of things that there's really not a lot of times that much left. So if we can prevent and put our efforts into hiring to prevent, it's the key. The other example I use is, where do most fire fatalities occur and most fires happen today? What occupancy? Anybody know? Single family residential. What properties do fire departments usually never inspect? Single family homes. We inspect commercial, we inspect industrial, but we don't work with citizens in the single family homes, which is where we know the fire fatalities and injuries are occurring. In the UK, and Merseyside Fire District is one that I'm very familiar with. I've gotten to go spend almost a month over there now looking at their change. Merseyside was kind of like the little Detroit. I'm from Michigan, I can point out Detroit as a bad example. But Detroit didn't have all the greatest demographics, and in Merseyside it was very much the same. High illiteracy rate, high poverty rate, lots of abandoned properties. When they made the change to integrated risk management planning and focused on prevention, one of the things that the chief went to the union, which they're all unionized firefighters, said, we're going to inspect every residential structure. And the union looked at him and said, you're absolutely crazy, chief. There's 500,000 structures in Merseyside. We can't even inspect the commercial and industrial we have every year. And he said, you know what? Let's try. Let's really make an effort with company level inspections and prevention and teaming and looking at all this, and let's see what we can do. 2 years later, they finished inspecting 500,000 properties and identified the high-risk occupancies that they would then target for follow-up inspections, public education, classes, with the goal of not having fires. And as I said, about a 60% reduction in the level of fires that they were experiencing. So a huge transition from where they were to where they are today. simply by doing something simple as looking at where was the fire occurring? What were the causes of the fire? And targeting those versus let's just go out and have a program for the sake of having a program. A similar area happened just outside of Washington, D.C. in one of the counties. They were experiencing a lot of kitchen fires and house fires, and when they drilled down into it, it happened to be one immigrant population that they tended to cook with lots of oils and different things. They were having a lot of kitchen fires. So they began targeting those folks with public education, smoke alarms, putting fire extinguishers. They got a local big box retailer to donate the small kitchen fire extinguishers and substantially reduce the number of fires that are going on, which is the whole purpose of what we should be doing, is targeting, let's not have a fire in the first place. Philadelphia has set a goal of having 0 fires in the next, I think it's the next decade. A little ambitious, I think, sometimes, but, right, because people are people. You're going to have fires. But their goal, their point was, we don't want to have fires. So what can we do through education, through community outreach, through inspection, through everything else to not have a fire in Philadelphia? It's a pretty lofty goal. Community risk reduction, it's a concept started again in the UK, looking at risks as they went in and inspected and said, you know, if you take care of this problem, or we can hook you up with some folks that can come take care of that issue, we can reduce the risk that you're facing. And community risk reduction carries throughout the community. Flooding, looking at ways that you can prevent flooding. It may be elevating houses, it may be improving storm drains, it may be doing different things, but again, a comprehensive approach across the whole community to look at how do you prevent incidents from happening in the first place. We know, and driving around your town, you're obviously crack sealing your streets. We know that prevention on road maintenance is about 7% reduction in cost. It's a huge savings in focusing on prevention versus rebuilding. Prevention in FEMA, they look at 70% of the businesses that are damaged in a severe event, a flood, tornado, usually don't recover. They'll go out of business. So they know that prevention works, but oftentimes we ignore that when we're looking at emergency services. Again, looking at what can we do ahead of the incident to reduce that risk. All hazard, all risk planning, and again, building in prevention. Do you involve your fire department, your police department when you're looking at new projects and new development? In Washington, D.C., Chief Kathleen Lanier, when they built Verizon Center, if you've ever been to Washington, D.C., it's where the hockey team plays and the basketball team plays. I live a block away. But when it was built, they didn't involve the police and fire. And you'll notice there are narrow sidewalks. It was dark when they opened up. They had a lot of crime, a lot of problems that they then had to go back and redesign. Well, it's cheaper to do it once than it is to come back and redo things. So they ended up adding more lighting, adding more foot patrols, more police officers. So when they did the stadium, the Nats Stadium, which hasn't had anywhere near the attendance, but I'm a Tiger fan anyway, so that's okay. But when they did the Nats Stadium, they brought the police chief in, they brought the fire chief in and said, okay, what do we do differently? What can we build into this so that we don't have problems once it opens? So the sidewalks are wider. There was more street lighting put in place. There were designated walkways to the metro system. Buses pulled off the roadway to pick up passengers. Again, all the things they did wrong in the Verizon Center development, they were able to correct by just simply sitting down with all of their team and saying, what is it that we can do? One of the challenges you always have in a community, everybody likes traffic except on their street. You like to see traffic downtown, you like to see people moving around, but so we put in cul-de-sacs, we put in dead-end streets, we do things to traffic calm. One of the problems with that is often you can see the fire station, but you can't get there from here without going a long ways out of the way. The worst example I think I've ever seen was in Hilton Head Island, and there's 13, they call them plantations. They're actually gated communities. And literally in one, the fire station was probably from here to your city manager, and yet it took almost 15 minutes because they couldn't get, there was a big brick wall and no entry point, so they had to drive all the way around 2 plantations in the front gate and all the way to the back. Well, after a $3 million fire at the house that was pretty much within that distance, the developer went back, cut a hole in the wall, made it look very attractive, but put a gate in that the fire department had access to. Saved them building another fire station at the cost of $2-3 million and staffing it and equipment, simply by making a change as easy as that. I mean, it really did require a lot of investment, and the developer paid for it in that case. When you look at the public protection classifications, this is from ISO. Countrywide or across the U.S., most departments are a 5 or above. There's a lot of departments. There's 33,000 fire departments in the United States. Compare that to the UK, which there's 1. They're basically fire brigades. Most fire departments in this country are 9s. 9 usually means that you don't have a lot of water. In order to get down to a 5, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, you have to have a dedicated water system. Water is still 40% of the ISO rating. In Texas, again, it pretty much holds true. You have a lot of 9 ratings. So your department being a 2, you're in an exceptional category. I mean, there are only 54 1s and 207 2s in the entire state of Texas. Out of it, I didn't add up all those, but it's out of a couple thousand. So you're in pretty good shape there. I wouldn't say that you could improve that much. Again, the questions you have to ask: do you deploy traditionally, or do you look at data? Are you looking at all of these different impacts? Are you asking people the question? How does research and best practice fit into your department? Are you sending people out to training? Are you encouraging them to go take part in exchanges with other departments? One of the best things I always liked was when my staff would go out to other departments and come back and say, gee, things aren't so bad after all. It was amazing how just getting out and seeing how other people had to work with equipment or deficiencies, they came back with a whole new attitude. Can we all just get along? Are we able to sit down in a room and discuss and be willing to change? Sometimes that's the hardest thing to do, is we don't want to do things different. I don't like to do things different. I don't like to change. I'm sure that that's the case in most departments. Do we have a standard to cover? Is it approved by the local government? Are they involved in the process? Is the public involved? Or are we looking at integrated risk management planning and trying to involve everybody? Do we have short and long-term strategic plans that are up to date and current with assigned responsibilities? Do we engage our communities? Are we regularly asking the people and getting them involved in their service? Because quite honestly, they're paying the bill for this, so shouldn't they be involved? And again, are we looking at dispatch times? It's one of the areas that we frequently see falls down in most communities. Are we looking at how long it takes to answer a call, to dispatch the units and actually get them on the road? That can be a key dropping point.
The spark and ambition behind the London 2012 Olympics is to leave behind its imprint on a generation, to help young people across Britain find the best in themselves, and in doing so transform our communities and their futures. We'd like to play a part in this. It's an ambition we share, because we've seen and experienced the difference when you connect with young people, when they become motivated and inspired. And we know how to get out there and help deliver the ambition. On Merseyside, we have direct contact with over 100,000 young people annually. Not just to tell them about what we do as firefighters, but really to get them fired up.
Merseyside Fire and Rescue Service is recognised as a beacon fire and rescue service. There's been technological advances in the way we respond to incidents, but for me, it's been the way we've delivered innovatively in community safety. We've recognised the connection between healthier lifestyles and the safer communities that we all want.
MFRS have applied themselves to a sense of brand over recent years. Firefighters are traditionally seen as strong, inspirational role models. And it's this notion that MFRS have focused on in order to open doors in the most challenging of neighbourhoods.
Well, I've been involved in sport for, since I was their age, and it's just good to see that the fire service is getting so actively involved in trying to promote the sport for the children,
if we can use our fitness and then we can get out as role models into the communities and use things such as boxing for the youngsters in the area.
MFRS takes cage football and boxing to some of the toughest areas, giving youngsters a sporting opportunity as well as building a natural pathway in reducing antisocial behaviour. Our Prince's Trust and early courses are personal development programmes for 16 to 25-year-olds. 80% of participants go on to full-time training, education or employment. Our Beacon Life courses connect with young people who could be at risk of exclusion or have already been excluded. Over 1,500 have already taken up their courses, and 75% of these have gone on to volunteer for further projects with us. Our Start Right programme deals with lifestyle issues surrounding 5 to 8-year-olds to help them become more aware of healthy nutrition and exercise. All Fired Up helps older children with weight problems by providing modern gym facilities, healthy cooking classes, and general advice and inspiration. We don't just visit schools. We have an integrated programme of embedded firefighters in schools who continue to build the brand and to promote sport and fitness. For example, in partnership with the Rugby Football Union, our staff have become qualified coaches and are now teaching rugby in local schools.
It's working on another level. Yes, we're getting out there and getting to communities on the doorstep, but equally, we're inviting them onto our doorstep, if you like. Fire stations are great community resources that we're only just tapping into.
Merseyside has 26 community fire stations, each equipped with gyms and community rooms. Young people come into the stations to take part in health and fitness activities. Here our firefighters run health classes for kids, with a great deal of fun thrown in. And our Fire Cadet scheme gives youngsters skills and self-confidence, generally a great starting point for further project work with us.
I think with the firefighters getting involved, I think it really makes it better.
They encourage us and they tell us things that Chris might not know.
Being a firefighter is great, he saves lives, but being a coach as well is just amazing.
It's great because you go straight from being a fireman to him working with us, and he gives up his time just to work with us.
The Fire and Rescue Service has a unique presence in our towns and cities, and now we're using that presence in a unique way. We're working with our communities, particularly our young people, to encourage them to be more involved in the community, to be involved in sport and in healthy activity. Across Merseyside we have 26 fire stations and nearly 1,000 firefighters. Imagine, if you will, that the UK's 680 fire stations and their teams of over 40,000 firefighters all become involved in promoting sport and healthy exercise. 40,000 Olympic ambassadors promoting the Games and leaving a legacy of more sport and healthy exercise in our communities. This is an existing resource, simply waiting for a starter's piston. In 2008, we ran the World Firefighter Games and Mini Olympics, attracting over 3,000 competitors from over 40 countries. It was a great success, inspiring young and old. So we have the ingredients for something special to happen. We have the brand and the resources. We have the experience and the knowledge, the ambition and the spirit. This is just a snapshot of the healthy exercise initiatives with which we're involved. All these will be brought together under the FireFit brand, and we'll promote it across all UK fire and rescue services. It is a great opportunity to see firefighters as fit, healthy role models, and use the 2012 Olympics to inspire people from all walks of life to get involved with healthy activity.
When they looked in their community, what were their problems? Obesity, smoking, which then led to fires in the homes from smoking in bed, everything else. So they began to tackle the root problems. At their fire station, the main fire station in Merseyside, I can set up a tour if you ever want to go over there. It's amazing. I went in at 9 o'clock at night. They had just finished with almost 400 kids, and they call it football, it's soccer, okay? But they were playing soccer. They have 3 fields. The firefighters work with the kids. Talk about a positive role model in the community. And it's, again, using the firefighters' skill, their positive viewpoint from the community to influence. In large case, a lot of these kids would be on the street. They would be lost. Their metrics are amazing that they track every kid. If the child is not going to school, they don't get to participate. They have to show that they're attending classes. They have to show that they're taking and finishing their homework. They have to show a positive school environment, and they have to pay £12 a month. It's not a freebie. It's like a social thing. But when I went in and I came in unannounced one night, the walls are all white, the floors are all are tile, but they glistened. And I said, okay, how did you know I was coming? Because you had to go through and paint this. This station is 3 years old. but the kids now view that as their kind of safety spot. Because their choice was go out on the street and face whatever they might encounter, or work with the firefighters, get education, get fit. Again, they have smoking cessation programs, they have a whole host, because as they looked at what were their problems in the community that they were responding to, let's tackle the problem versus responding to the complaint afterwards. So it's a completely different story. Most of the money for that was donated by businesses and industry in the community. Very little tax dollars went into it. Now, the downside is they have 25% less firefighters today, because the fires are down so much that they didn't need all the trucks. They put the money and put the people on prevention that would have been fighting the fire. They're now on prevention and working with the community in pub ed and everything else. So it's a complete reversal of where they were, that they're not responding to the calls. Again, they were looking at cuts. Again, their mission statement is a safer, stronger community. Very simple. That's what they're targeting is. That's what they want to get to. Their challenge was, and what most communities have struggled with, is that normally we focus all of our efforts down on the rapid response. That's where we focus all of our money, all of our efforts, and instead they're focusing on the fire prevention aspects, looking at and driving down using data, where are the fires, where's everything happening, where are we spending our time. Let's target that versus just going out on call after call after call. A much more successful outcome than what they would have had. Again, when you're looking at staffing for the worst case scenario, which is normally what we do, there's no limit to the amount of resources that you'll have to put to that. Because no matter what you come up with as a worst case scenario, there'll always be something worse. I guess if there was a word. There could be a worse flood, or there could be a railroad derailment, or whatever. There can always be something worse. So are there opportunities to work together with other communities, to band together, to share resources among communities? We've worked in I know Plymouth, Michigan actually partnered with another community nearby for fire response, so that they could improve not just the service they offer to the community, but to their responders. Because with 7, 8 people in a department, there wasn't much chance to professionalize, to specialize. By increasing their scope, people could go up in rank, they could specialize in areas. It gave a much broader opportunity. And quite honestly, sometimes it can be boring when you have nothing to accept the same old calls in a smaller community. Again, one of the things that we do with communities, we drill down and try and find out what the worst case scenario is. And this was a community that ran 6,000 to 7,000 calls that they were doing. And one of their concerns was they were running out of resources. They had 8 fire stations. In some stations they had 2 engines that were responding. They actually, when they had 16 calls or more in an hour, happened twice in a year, and it happened to be in significant disasters. But when we drilled down even to the 2, they still had 3 engine companies with 4 people each available on the worst case scenario. So even though they thought their resources were all out, they really still had capacity to fight one more house fire if they had to. Again, are you using aggregate data to make staffing decisions? The one problem with aggregate data is if my calls for service, for instance, increase 50%, and all of those calls are grass fires or leaf fires or smoke investigations, there's probably a pretty good chance I can handle that without any more people. But if I want to add 42% more staff because I had 42% more calls, I may be defeating myself in the end. What was the nature of those calls? How much time was spent? This was a case in a city of 45,000. They reported 161 fire calls a year. 161 fires. Well, as you drill down and begin to come up to it, they actually had 6 fire calls. 5 used an 1.5-inch line and 1 used a booster line to extinguish. All the others were smoke investigations, non-structure, false alarms, which is a huge area we're starting to see across the United States. False alarms. Many departments are spending more time on false alarms than they are calls for service. And that's EMS and fire calls. So that's one that we always kind of identify and try and drill into and see what's the nature of the calls for alarms. Again, looking at a community risk assessment and vulnerability study, it looks at risks, looks at your maps, looks at demographics, looks at your future opportunities, looks at the workload of the fire units in the stations. What's the call demand? What's your response time? Are you meeting the critical tasks and matching it up with available funding? Because it's not an infinite pot, that we all know. Looking at the standards, again, looking at how to deploy. Where are your risks at? In this case, the brighter the color, the higher the risks in the community. That's where you want to concentrate your resources. If there's no risk and no calls for service, you probably are putting a station in the wrong area. We know travel time, and it used to be, do you know how we used to locate fire stations in this country? It's how far the horse could run at full gallop before it collapsed, pulling the steamer, which happens to be about 1.5 miles, which just happens to be pretty good of how far to locate a station, the radius in between. But it was all designed on how far the horse could run. And we still use kind of that standard to this day. The problem that we go into at a lot of stations, take a protractor on a map and you draw a circle 1.5 miles and you say, that's the response area. Well, when you close off streets and you put in traffic calming and you build expressways through, that circle may be a polygon, it may be a triangle, it could be a half a circle because you can't get to here from there. And so if you've ever tried to do CPR in the back of an ambulance on a traffic calm street with speed bumps, it's not really a fun thing to do, and it's kind of next to impossible to do. So we do the mapping and look at where's the response areas using GIS for 6 minutes, 6 minutes, 4 minutes, 6 minutes, 8 minutes, and on up, and see how much of the community is actually covered. And where, and again from that, looking at matching that with demographics and the calls for service, where are you going to locate your station? Is it going to be in this demand area that has a high demand, or are you going to put a station up where there are no calls for service and ignore where your demand is? Now you're increasing response times, so you may be working against yourself. Again, the critical tasking came out of the next study, the NIST study, of how many people you need to handle the risks. And you need to identify the risk first before you can do the staffing. The big things that came out of the NIST study were the critical tasking element, but one other thing that was revealed in that is you're going to perform how your department trains. If you deploy 4-person engine companies all the time, and you suddenly put a 5th person on the truck, and the NIST study actually showed this, they had 4-person companies from fire departments around DC that always deployed with 4 people. They threw a 5th person on, and the performance didn't improve. It actually went down slightly. And one of the points was, suddenly you have a 5th person there that everybody was asking, where'd you come from? What are we going to do with you? And it doesn't always work because you're going to perform the way you train. And so it's important that you use realistic conditions, you train and you perform and you deploy the way and we should all one of this is a pretty basic one, but it shows up better on the slide than the other graphs. But again, looking at your dispatch time, are you tracking that? Are you looking at how long it takes you to turn out? Are you looking at what your response time is in total? Or are you looking at just one or two of those components? We know that at night, usually response times will increase. And everybody said, well, how can that be? There's less traffic. What do you have to do usually when you wake up in the middle of the night and you get woke up? First, you have to wake up. Sometimes you have to go to the bathroom. And it's a fact. I mean, you've got things, you're not going to just jump out and be on the go right away. And so it was kind of a shock, and when some of the studies first came out early, why was it increasing at night? You'd think with less traffic it might be quicker, but it's just a fact of science. When you're woke up and you have to perform, it takes a minute. The other thing that we're doing is where do we put the sleeping quarters in most fire stations? It used to be you slid down the pole, you were right above the truck, you had day boots at the foot of your bed, you jumped out of your bed into day boots, slid down a pole, and went out the door. Today, we're barrier-free, so we make the stations larger and larger and larger. The sleeping quarters is normally away from the gear because of carcinogens and concerns, and then you have to get to the equipment. So again, it's just simple distance. It shouldn't be a surprise, but we still find that some people are shocked. And again, looking at are you tracking that 365? Most cities have a bell curve. Your calls usually begin increasing about 7 a.m. They taper off after 7 p.m. Are you staffing for the worst case, the noon period, which if you're on a 24-hour schedule, you have a lot of people on those outlying areas versus on the inner times when you're the busiest. So do you have the flexibility to work varying hours of shifts that you can target the peak times? One of the things that the UK found, especially with single parents, is that they liked having a broken shift, that they could get their children off to school, work, then go back and get their children. So they went to a variety of shifts, again, in order to meet the demands and the needs of when their calls were coming in. Sleep deprivation is an issue that we have to be concerned with, especially in 24 hours. If you stay up for 24 hours, are you as sharp at the end of that period as you are at the start? I can tell you that probably in about an hour, I'm going to be dragging today because it's going to be getting close to that 24-hour mark. And so again, are we looking at that as we deploy and as we look at our response? Are there other things that firefighters can do in between calls for service? Training, maintenance, code enforcement, a huge area. Can they help deal with codes? Can they work with building codes and functioning smoke detectors? Are they involved in plan review? Are they involved in looking at redevelopment? Are they performing company inspections? Are they doing public education? All of those things in a robust department can help. The new transition is to mobile integrated healthcare, where there are mini health centers that they can take blood pressures. A lot of times they can provide services that then EMS is not called on out to make a call for service. Hospitals like this because they're penalized now if people are coming back to the emergency room. There's a disincentive to have people come back in. So I know Mesa, Arizona, Arlington, Texas, Anaheim, California, there are several that are leading the way on making them a mobile integrated health center. The other thing, think about if your community has an aged population or an older population. One of the problems and I live next to a senior citizen, it's 8 stories high. It's an Asian senior citizen community in DC. And most of those people that I see leaving, I get to talk to, and they're really nice people. But most of them have no families. They're 80, 90-year-old people. They have no kids left. If they do, they probably have moved well beyond Washington, D.C. They may be back in China. They may be around the world. Their friends, they've outlived all their friends. But who will come if they call? The fire department. And so we used to see the fire department there a lot. What D.C. started doing was using the senior citizen providers to call those people every day. Say, how are you doing? How's things going? Did you take your medication? And the first few days, I talked to both sides of it. I talked to the people that were calling. I said, first couple of times we spent about 5 minutes. Now I spend about 45 minutes talking to these people. I said, that's got to be awful. And they're like, no, because I'm retired too, and it kind of keeps me occupied. And so they become friends. And again, they aren't calling the EMS provider. They're getting prompted, and again, making that call for service go away. It's a success. Again, looking at combination of vehicles, the UK does this a lot better than we do, although they use a lot of motorcycles in the UK. I'm not quite sold on that yet, but this was a case in Florida. They combined an ambulance and a rural engine in a rural part of the county. They had few calls for service, but it's actually a full ambulance along with the engine. That they were able to put 2 firefighters on it. They can handle a car fire. They can still do a transport, but it was cheaper than running 2 vehicles out. Arlington is experimenting with the SUVs now, where they're sending a one-person paramedic. Washington, I'm trying to think of the Tualatin Valley, Washington, sends a paramedic chase vehicle out, and then a lot of times we'll call off the EMS or say you can step it down, you don't need to come lights and siren. Again, it's safer in the community. They're delivering the paramedic first, and again, not having to run all the other equipment on the call. When you look at workloads by stations, and this is what we start drilling down to for communities, looking at how busy are each of the engines, each of the vehicles by station. Again, that was station 1, station 2. One of the departments that we looked at in California, they had one station made 8 calls a year, while their busiest station was actually this one, was making 2,180 runs. So you have 8 to that difference. It's a huge discrepancy. But the other problem they were doing, they replaced all their engines at once. So, the engine at that station that made 8 calls, the chalk hadn't even worn off the tires from being new, and they were replacing it already. So again, that can help drive equipment replacements, where you locate it. Again, accreditation, if not, why not? It's a continuous improvement process. Again, don't go for a plaque on the wall. This is my commercial. If you're going just to put a plaque on the wall, save your money. It's really a waste of your time if you're not looking at using this as a tool to continuously improve your department. I used to get in a lot of trouble with my board when I said that, but it's really true. If all you're doing is getting the plaque, you're going to probably lose it in a few years anyway, because you're not going to keep up on it. It requires data, it requires management, it requires performance, and you have to be reaccredited every 5 years. So you have to keep up on this. And if you're not, it's not going to happen. This was an article in PM Magazine, and I'm sure your city manager can find that for you, but it was on the new EMS models, and looking at how do we integrate that in the fire service. And EMS has the same thing, looking at prevention versus response. That's going to be the name of the game with everything. These are some of the changes, and one of the things that Kansas found, and this was the report, I'll forward this to your manager, but the reality is that most EMS systems today were developed in a piecemeal fashion, driven more by politics, the influence of labor unions, and past practice as opposed to an efficient, patient-centered, evidence-based system. And second, staffing every ambulance with all paramedics in an EMS system where it's known that the majority of patients only require BLS is about as efficient as staffing an urgent care center with cardiothoracic surgeons. Again, are we designing our system for what the calls for service are? Or are we designing just because we designed it? And again, targeting that and using data to say what kind of response are we going to tailor. And with that, I think I was told I need to cut it at about 45, 50 minutes, so I wanted to get done with that. I'll leave the whole slide, there's a few more there, and the other video, if you want to look at that later, that's fine. And I'll answer any questions that you may, hopefully answer any questions.
I have a couple questions, Mike Chief.
Okay.
Number one, are you a proponent of fire-based EMS, or you're a proponent of like what we have here, two paramedic, county-based service?
I guess I'm more of a proponent of an evidence-based system, which is going to work better. Whatever system you do, you can't develop in a vacuum. Too often with the fire-based, what I usually see left out is the EMS component or the hospital. It's important that everybody come together, and no matter what you do. All of them have advantages. I mean, fire-based can provide a continuum of care. The hospital, one of the challenges with hospitals, especially today, is they tend to do system status management or dynamic deployment. Sometimes they're going to run pretty thin. And what we've seen in a lot of communities is what they do is transfer the risk over to the fire department. That the first responder then is sitting on the call for 20, 30, 40, 50 minutes because it's viewed as a BLS call you can babysit. The other challenge that we see there is on the other end of the spectrum. Emergency rooms a lot of times are skipped back a little bit, and the paramedic that transports them in from the fire department is kept because there is still a lot of the emergency room people. So when the emergency room is packed, we'll use you as our care provider. Now that takes the unit off the road and raises the cost for the community basis. So it really has to be everything together, and it has to be watched. I mean, because it's easy for any one of the entities to get out of whack. You can, we've seen cases where the paramedic was being kept in the emergency room for over an hour, watching patients that weren't, critical care, but the hospital didn't staff accordingly. When you're taking 1, 2, 3 units out of service for over an hour, and then they have a half-hour transport besides, you've wasted your entire department's depleted. So now we're even to get the resources when a true emergency happens. Conversely, if you're babysitting regularly on calls, is that brought to the ambulance provider? And more importantly, when the patient comes in, they should be triaged and go to the appropriate location. Everybody points to Seattle, Washington as being the guru of healthcare. They have one of the highest, actually not the highest, but they have one of the highest success rates for sudden cardiac arrest. Actually, Naples, Florida, and Las Vegas, Nevada, which everybody is shocked. Las Vegas has a high one. Las Vegas wants you to recover from that heart attack and get those quarters going in that machine as quickly as possible. So everybody in the casino, from the janitor all the way up to the dealer at the table, is trained in CPR. There are AEDs located throughout the facility. The responder comes in. They're delivered now a patient who is viable and not passed away. They then take them to a appropriately designated trauma center, and usually within an hour, you're into some type of intervention. You're either having a stent, or you're having a catheter, or whatever, looking at your heart. And so they have a very high success rate. So to answer your question, it can be all of the above, but whatever it does, it has to be evidence-based, and you have to have metrics in place, because it's anybody can point to any one of them as being a failure or a success. It's only when they all come together and are properly designed with all of the reporting in place that you'll truly have the great system. And I think that's what everybody wants, is the grade system.
Right, and I agree, thank you. My other question, or two more questions. The other question is, you talked about ISO earlier. ISO 5 or 6 may be okay, in my opinion, in a built-out city, where you're not looking to draw that commercial building in. But here in our community, we're up against Round Rock, Georgetown, Leander, Cedar Park, buying for new commercial business to come in. Do you not think that the ISO rating of 2 is better attracting to a commercial business that's looking to plant food in the community?
Especially commercial is where ISO means the most, where the big savings are. It's for commercial, not too big, because a lot of real big are self-insured. So there's a kind of sweet spot that you want to hit. But 2 is certainly, again, it's one more indicator that you're looking at things and you've got a plan. The thing I always tell people, don't just fight to get to a 1, because you can spend a lot of money getting to a 1, where there might be better bangs for the buck that you can achieve. It may be in the prevention area, and ISO is changing. Everybody wonders why ISO hasn't changed quicker. You have to remember, ISO promulgates standards that then have to go out to all 50 states and get voted on. And some states have the authority to say all of our cities that do this will be a 2, and they're going to be a 2. And so there are some politics that go on in there, but to change anything in ISO, and they just changed to add strategic planning as extra points, as extra credit points. It's not part of the ISO standard. Looking at standard of cover, it's extra credit points because they couldn't get a unanimous buy-in. And so they gave extra credit points that can give you a better ISO rating. So there are a lot of things that you can do that a good fire department should be doing anyway that will get you to that better level. But again, it's the totality of things, looking at what's your fire loss, looking at how many fires do you have. If you have 0 and Round Rock has 20, or Austin has 100, or fire fatalities. I always look at how many fire fatalities are in your community, how many responders are injured, because we should have a safe environment for everybody. And so I think it's kind of like one more arrow in the quiver, but it's not the sole answer on ISO.
And the last thing I wanted to mention is, first I want to thank you for your presentation. It was very well put together. We are lucky enough here to have a chief that does data-driven analytics. So a lot of the stuff that you talked about we are doing, like we played kickball with some of the kids out in one of the neighborhoods a couple weeks ago. But even so, all that still takes bodies. So do you guys put together any sort of data as to how many bodies, apparatus, stuff you need for a city of this size, with the call volume that we have, with the money that we are able to put towards it, and where do we find that?
Again, what we usually do is drill down into the workload, look at what the workload is, look at the community risk, and try and match those up. The one thing I always caution cities, whether it's fire or police, try not to get into the per thousand comparison, because the environment of your community versus Austin versus Detroit. The classic case, you look at Grosse Pointe. If you've ever been to Michigan, Grosse Pointe is where all the millionaires live, which butts up to Detroit. They spend more per capita, and they're really proud of that, than Detroit. But who has the worst problems? Detroit probably should be spending more per capita than what the other community did. But that was how they said, well, Detroit spends $2.50 per thousand, we're going to spend $3 per thousand. Well, maybe Detroit should be spending 10. So just looking at per thousand, try and stay away from those. It's really looking at workload, what your calls for service are, what your losses are, what your risks are, and marrying all those with what's also coming down the road. You have a tremendous challenge here, because while growth is great, growth can also be very challenging, because you could put a fire station in the wrong location. And once a station's in a community, it's probably going to be there for 100 years. I mean, although you've moved yours 3 or 4 times, I read up that. But you're one of the exceptions that I've seen. Normally a fire station goes in a community, and it's there forever.
It's easier to move a volunteer station than
Well, it is, and it's in a community that's also developing like yours has. So you've been fortunate that you've been able to grow, but a lot of communities don't have that opportunity. So again, it's a fine balance. You don't want to get too far ahead of the development, but you don't want to get too far behind it. You've got to be able to get the services in when they're needed, and it's identifying that. And again, it's looking at the data, looking at the performance, looking at planning, and all of those things together.
I have a question. In that one city that they inspected all them homes, how did they legally go inside people's homes?
All voluntary. What they found is if the police department showed up at the door and knocked and said, we want to come in and inspect your house, probably you're not going to let them in. But what the fire department did is they teamed with, in a lot of cases, the pastoral, the church leaders. And while they might not let a city official in alone, they'll let the pastor come in and meet with them and inspect, because we're here to help you. We're here to identify what are your risks. We'll put up a new smoke detector in all your kids' bedrooms free. We'll do all this stuff. And so, and the chief points out, Tony McGurk, he just retired, one of 2 fire chiefs knighted in the UK. But one of the things that they had to identify was who is the kind of the person that the community looks up to. And that's the person you want to get on the team in that area. Maybe a condo association board. It may be the senior citizen center in your community. Maybe your Parks and Recreation director. It might be the chief of police. It might be the city manager. She got great pie for me tonight at your restaurant downtown, and knew the locations to go. But again, it's finding that kind of advocate that can get them into the structure. Because he said some people didn't want anybody from government coming in and looking at anything. And so can you find somebody that will make that connection for you? Which is also can be daunting. That's not an easy task. But once you get that in, and then and he said the big change was once they saw we came in, put a free smoke detector up, put a fire extinguisher in the kitchen, and were there really truly to help. He said then they began talking to their neighbors and said, hey, you've got to get the fire department over here. They need to do this. None of it is mandatory in the UK. Everything was voluntary, which surprises a lot of people because, and I know if you came into most communities and said, we're from the government, we're here to help you, that's not going to get you in the door. It's kind of like the checks in the mail. It's not going to happen. So it's identifying who is viewed in your community. Maybe the mayor. The mayor may have be the advocate and the cheerleader that has that connection with people. You have to find that person.
So that was in the UK, that city you're talking about?
Yeah.
So no one in the United States has done it?
We're actually starting to see that now across some states are starting to get some departments. It's almost individual departments. Again, Anaheim, I think of Canada is actually getting more into it because the Canadian government has adopted that standard, that's what they want to do is start focusing more on residential and getting away from some of the others. In this country, it's just starting. Florida, I know around Jupiter, Florida, they're starting. There's a lot of suspicion. One of the things that we have to overcome in this country is just the suspicion of government. Are we really there to help? Philadelphia has been going great guns. They've been getting into a lot of areas that I didn't think they'd get into. But again, it was identifying their kind of cheerleader that got them introduced to that community. Because not everybody, there are also some illegal things that go on in houses. They don't always want anybody coming in their house. And those you may never get into, but you may be able to get into with the building inspector. Or you may have somebody else that can make that introduction, maybe a little forcefully. But all of them are voluntary. The other thing that they start combining with is saying, okay, there's this cord on the floor, by the way, we'll tape that down for you, but that'll help you not trip and fall. Because we know about 15% of people that trip and fall, break their hip, never come out of the hospital. They die. Scottsdale, Arizona started doing that. They started targeting senior citizens because they're having so many hip fractures. So they said, we'll come into your house, we'll do a safety inspection, we'll look for torn carpet, we'll tape it down, we'll do all these things, because then you don't call us with a broken hip and never leave the hospital. And again, had pretty much community support because it was viewed as a positive. It wasn't viewed as a threat. And that's the challenge you face. You can't go in and say, well, we're going to rank everything in this house and we're going to ticket everybody. There may be those that in a landlord case you have to do, but most of them, it's really there because you don't want to go back. That's the real goal, is not to come back.
So the city really has to have some buy-in to the fire department to make this program work, right?
The city, the community, everybody has to kind of develop the page of where you want to head. And it may be through a community planning effort, strategic planning effort, where the community's brought into public meetings, surveys. What do they want to see? Where do they want to see this go? They may say, we don't want any of this. We don't view it as important. And that's certainly acceptable too. That's something we have to be ready to face too. It usually won't be, but you never know. There may be people that don't like government.
Well, clean houses don't generally burn either. So.
Well, that's the thing.
Council, anybody else have any questions?
And I'll leave my card with your manager. If you have any questions, email me or give me a call. I'll be happy to answer them.
Thank you very much.
All right, thank you.
Very interesting.